Hello, everybody, and welcome to... I don't think we're live, so I'm just going to wait a few moments. I think we're still in the launch stage of it, so bear with us, and we will be live with you in just a few moments there. Okay, wonderful. So that is us live, and welcome to our panel show. So this is to mark Trans Day of Visibility in 2021. Now, what a crazy year this has been. We have gone through a huge pandemic, huge global pandemic. And what does that mean? It means that visibility for trans people has been even harder than it normally is. Oh, there's lots of reasons for why that happens, but we're going to discuss some of those reasons why visibility is poor for us in tonight's question and answer. So the topics that we're going to discuss, we're going to talk a little bit about what we had earlier, which was our showcase. And then we're going to talk a bit about each of the topics they raise. So the first one we're going to discuss is actually inclusion in sport. So what I have is a panel of people to help me do that. And the first guests that I'd like to introduce to our live stream, we have Felix, we have Gemma, which you'll remember from the sport video that we put up earlier. We have Jay, and we also have Dylan. So bear with me for a few moments while we load them into our chat, and I'll let them introduce themselves and who they are. So we'll start with Felix. Hi, Felix. Welcome to the live stream. And thank you very much for your contribution earlier. I really enjoyed it. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Katie. I'm Felix. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the vice chair of the trans support and community. And I also performed in the showcase that we had earlier as my drag character on a script.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I did really enjoy it. Well done on that one. And on the other side there, we have Gemma, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Gemma, she, her, and I am Operations Director at B. And also I was in the showcase with a video specifically focusing on trans people in sport.
Wonderful. And I'd like to come to Jay, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Jay. I'm 21. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the project manager / health and wellbeing manager for B and the vice chair for LGBT Northern Social Group. And you would have seen me earlier talking about visibility from within and visibility within the own community.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jay. We also are joined by Dylan. So Dylan was more of a last minute addition to the team here, but we're really happy for you to be here. Let me, if you don't mind, take a few moments there and just let us know who you are.
So first of all, can you hear me okay?
Wonderful.
Okay, awesome. Because I was a bit concerned about the old earphones there. Hi, I'm Dylan. I am non-binary. I used to run Non-Binary Edinburgh and set up kind of like the peer group for non-binary people there. And I'm a long time kind of follower of B and a fan.
Thanks, Dylan. Really appreciate that. So we had the first ever showcase that we've run, and we've called this project because it's not something which is specific to B or to Northern Social Group. We've called this the Trans Visibility Project, and it's a partnership of all trans people from the community that are able to get their voice heard and enables people to do more and see more, and it labels the reach of those individuals to go further. So the first topic that we're discussing tonight actually centers around brought up in one of the videos. So we're going to run a little clip for a second from Gemma. And we're just going to show you what we're talking about. So let's run that stream.
Most people think of visibility as being bold, standing out, being seen. Trans people throughout history, for the most part, have been invisible. So maybe Trans Day of Visibility is our Trans History Day, shining the spotlight on the ones who went before us and filling the gaps in the books and literature that sculpt society. People are naturally cautious of the unknown, and as we're erased from education, it's not surprising that people become so fascinated by our bodies. It's not surprising that caution can turn to fear when they witness something different from their own experiences. The people who stand out are those who are the first to do something or achieve something people didn't expect. The trailblazers.
Wonderful. So what this video really stands out to me is about historically the erasure of trans people in sport. And in a lot of our sporting arenas, such as football, basketball, tennis, swimming, we've had a lot of contention as to what trans people are and who they are. And actually, most recently, we've had a lot of pushback as a community from certain areas, such as women's rugby. So I'm going to go to the panel and I'm going to ask a few questions around what inclusion in sport means to them and what their experience of that has been. So I'm going to first come to Gemma. First of all, Gemma, I'd like to say that was a fantastic experience that you've taken us through in that video. And that will be available to watch again in just the video on Trans Day of Visibility itself on the 31st, where we're going to showcase each individual video. But what does inclusion in sport mean to you, and how has it affected your life?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think I kind of touched on in the video, which is, you know, for me, I think for a lot of people, you know, whatever the sport may be, for me, it's basketball. It's a huge part of my life. It's a major passion, you know, whether it's you know, supporting a team or whether it's taking part in the game. It's a fitness and health thing. It's a mental health thing. It's finding community. And it's something that I had very much in my life, you know, before transition. And after transition, it was a worry. You know, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to realistically take part again. You know, you hear so much about people's attitudes and unfair advantages. And so you worry what sort of reception you're going to get. And so it was something that, you know, it did take a little bit of courage to come back. And yeah, I won't go on too long, but it's been amazing and one of the best things I've ever done to come back. Luckily, my reception has been really good, but you know, obviously not everybody gets that same experience.
You said in the video that you have seen that others have followed in your footsteps. So how, you know, is that something which you generally find in sport? Is that what representation does? It opens doors for other people?
I think it does, yeah. I think you know, the example is when I went into the Women's League. As far as I'm aware, I was the first trans woman to do that. I do know for certain that there was another trans woman who joined the league afterwards, and part of that was because, you know, we could now clearly turn around and say to that person, yeah, the league is accepting, the league is welcoming, there is a place for you there. But someone has to take that first step, and at whatever level it is, whether it's grassroots or whether it's at the professional level, you know, yes, someone has to take that first big leap. But when they do, it shows everybody else that there is a route there and it is possible for them. It takes more imagination without that.
That's really good, because that actually links me in with my next question, which actually I want to bring Felix into this discussion. So Felix, and actually Dylan too, you are a non-binary. So for you two, I guess, what does inclusion in sport look like to you? And what has been your experiences with that to date?
Well, for me personally, I used to be sort of really big on kind of team sports. I played rugby. I did all sorts of things. And then when I started to kind of transition, um, I think, you know, I kind of realized that there aren't many people like me who have a team sport, or, like, there's no place like that for me, if that makes sense. Um, and I even looked into doing sort of, the white collar boxing.
Okay.
And when I spoke to them kind of about my transition and where I was, I was just starting hormones and kind of doing things like that. And I said, look, where are you going to put me? Because, um, like, I don't identify as female or male, or whatever. And literally, it came down to testosterone levels. And that I find that incredibly off-putting, and it made me kind of take a step back from wanting to do more kind of physical sort of things like that. But I'm now kind of really getting into sort of doing solo sports and doing, like, Ellen's just had me all day talking about cold water swimming, where there seems to be certainly like a lot more of an element of people are there for their own mental health, and so there's an inclusivity there that just I've not seen in other kind of places. And so I'm kind of exploring that and starting to find my place there and kind of enjoying it. But like I said, initially having my kind of gender boiled down to
Your testosterone levels,
the
yes.
chemicals that are in my body, I just kind of went, nah.
Okay.
So yeah.
And Felix, what's your thoughts there? Obviously, from my knowledge, I don't know of many non-binary sports people that are out there. Certainly, when it comes to people who trailblaze or trendset. What's that like for you? What when it comes to sport, do you feel the lack of their presence?
I guess it's tricky because I've never been particularly drawn to sort of conventional sports. I've never wanted to kind of do like team sports and things like that, which is where I think there's a lot more barriers. So I'm really into pole dancing. That's my main form of physical exercise. And the pole dance world is generally really, really inclusive. Obviously, you're going to find some opposition to trans and non-binary people everywhere, but it seems to be a lot less common in the pole dance world. So I think it's worked out quite well for me that I'm naturally drawn to the types of exercise where there's also a lot more inclusivity and a lot more diversity and a lot less barriers for people like me. I have encountered some barriers around being non-binary. Weirdly, the last time it was a real issue was when I tried to join an LGBT running club a few years ago, and they didn't know what to do with me at all. There was no changing facilities, and it wasn't very well kind of managed. But within the pole world, it's actually, aside from sort of some categories in competitions and stuff, there's not really anything that makes it challenging for me. Yeah, sorry, I've drifted away. You're asking about like sort of like public figures and things like that in sports, and I guess because of the kind of sports I'm into, that's not something that I've followed particularly closely.
Okay. And do you think there are any solutions out there for trans people, for non-binary people, to help include us in sport? Is there anything that has been of a particular aid to you in the past?
I think the biggest thing would be if we as a community organized more of our own spaces, our own groups to do these things, you know, because we'll immediately get it. Where anyone else, however well intentioned they are, there's going to be the point of them making the decision to include us more, finding the knowledge on how to do that, potentially coming up against barriers themselves from sort of external organizations and things like that. And then the solution being in place, where with trans people, kind of you're halfway there already because we've got a better idea of what we need as a community. I think as well, you know, making sure that people are accessing any kind of training and knowledge that's available to them. I know that there's been a few people within the pole community, trans people, who've like gone out of their way to kind of put information out there to educate studios on how to use more inclusive language and things like that. And sort of within individual sports and within smaller kind of communities, we can do a lot of, for those of us who are willing to do it and put the time and effort and kind of emotional energy in to kind of educate the people around us and keep them informed on how to improve accessibility. I think it does get more complex with non-binary people because it's less likely that we'll reach a point in our transition where we kind of sort of disappear into the background and can kind of blend in without being known to be trans. You know, it's not that all trans men and women want to be stealth, but they do have that option available to them sometimes, where non-binary people being stealth and being in the closet are essentially the same thing. You know, we're kind of reverting to where we were before, which makes it more challenging, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, it's possibly the anti of what you are looking for as you know, to express yourself and be visible in the sport is to not conform with those two binary options which are given. So I'd also like to bring in Jay, and Jay, you are the Health and Wellbeing Officer for B, and also the Vice Chair for LGBT Northern Social Group. So you have a lot of experience when it comes to how things like sport create a healthy environment for trans people to live in, and obviously when it comes to health, we have a dire situation right now for trans people. What can we do to help people get access to sport? What is it that we need to do to create more trailblazers, to create more identities within our binary system to help people be more included?
I think, interestingly enough, one thing I thought would be worth mentioning while on the topic of sport, I did actually about a year ago, just like within the community, within like the groups of B and just generally the north of where like we are based, I ran like a survey poll online of where people feel comfortable and regarding to swimming. So out of the 90 people that responded, 67 people said that they would love to go swimming but just don't feel comfortable, able to, or safe to.
And I mean, that's a horrific number. I mean, really, if you think about it, that's, if you put that across a larger population of trans people, that's a lot of trans people.
Yeah, and this is only 90 people, and then when going into more detail, it was things that came up of the people that do go swimming, they choose to be silent in changing rooms, they choose to go at a quieter time. It came up things like people taking the shirts off and not feeling comfortable, and just a general safety issue. I think it's on part a massive bigger societal issue of trans people deserve and need to feel safe, and that's something that we can do within community, but also we've got to reach out to allies and we have to find these spaces, because without it and people not feeling safe, it does cause a bigger onset issue of not only dysphoria but mental health. Like physical exercise for some people is massive for mental health.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I mean, I've always been of the philosophy that whatever we do, it always boils down to two things: safety and dignity. So, you know, wherever you are, you've got to be able to feel safe, and you've also got to be treated with the dignity and respect. But they're generally the two reasons why people don't engage in sport or everything within society, is that either one or both isn't being met.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think United with Pride are a good example of that as well, especially they've been doing a lot of like working with their like trans members and trans allies and stuff, and some of the stories they have, like even a barrier of support in a football team can make you have transphobia. It can be sort of like, you want to be a woman, so why are you into football? You know, which it makes no sense. You know, but those barriers come up not only within playing sport, but also just liking sport and watching sport. Like the full arena is something where the trans community are fighting for visibility.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and thank you for your insight on that one. I do also think they were one of the contributors to our show reel, and I really like a lot of what they've done. They've talked about pronouns and also, you know, how to, you know, treat people with respect, and how to you know, how to navigate that world of football, which is such a, it's got this perception of this hyper masculine type environment, and the reality is very far from that, because the fans are much wider than this core perception that they have. How do we make everybody in society feel included with that? Trans people specifically are excluded because we don't allow that that to be the case. What I would like to do now, if that's okay, is actually roll another showcase. So this one, we are going to be now moving on to our next topic, which is education and awareness. The contributors which I would like to bring in are Steph, Alice, Ellen, and Liam. So these four were also contributors earlier to our show reel. I don't think Liam was, but they have some really valuable insights, especially when it comes to education and awareness. Hello, team. So what I'll do is I'll let you all just introduce yourselves. So if I move on to Ellen, and if you just tell us a little bit about yourself there.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm the secretary of B Trans Support. As I said in my showcase earlier on, I'm a writer and I work for the NHS.
Okay, and Alice. And I've lost your audio, unfortunately, Alice. So I'm going to move on to Steph while we sort that out. So, hiya, Steph.
Hi, my name's Steph, and I work for Sunderland College.
Right, wonderful. Okay, and Liam.
Hi, my name's Liam. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a board member for B and the Community Support and Safeguarding Officer for LGBT Northern Social Group.
Wonderful, thank you. And do we have Alice back in the room?
We could try again. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Good to hear your voice.
I'm Alice. I'm the Communications Director for B, which isn't very good considering I've just been mute. I work for the civil service. Love my job with passion.
Okay. So in this section, I'd really like to talk about education and awareness, ways that we can do that and what currently exists. So I'm going to, hopefully we've got queued up another little section of our show reel from earlier. And that's just to kind of give us a bit of a reminder of what we're up against. So let's roll that if we have it.
Alice, and I am the Communications Director of B, and I work for the Civil Service. But before we get started, something I need to say about the channel. Just a very small change. I've been wondering how to say this for a while now, but basically I'm transgender and it's something I've struggled with all my life, and I finally started to deal with it. What does Trans Day of Visibility mean for me? Good question. When I was 24, there wasn't a great deal of trans visibility. Only what was in the newspapers now and again, which was like sensationalism and kind of mocking people who were trans. And I tried to get some help when I was 24 with the gender dysphoria, and I went to the wrong place for that help. And I got made to look like a drag queen, and I'm not a drag queen. But at that time, because there wasn't any visibility, I thought, okay, that must be what it is to be trans. And that wasn't me. I wasn't a drag queen. So I went back in the closet for another 20 years. Roll on those 20 years, and social media is getting a bit bigger, and YouTube, and a lot of young, amazing people, young trans people who are being really visible and out there on YouTube. And I'm sat there thinking, oh, hang on a second, maybe I am trans after all. And back then, when I was 24, was the wrong place to go, which obviously it was. So that is why trans visibility is really important, because people who are struggling and are fearful of coming out the closet and don't know where to go for help, having that visibility shows people what it is to be trans, and it shows people that don't have to be in the closet. You can be out there and you can be accepted by people. And yes, there are lots of hate and there's lots of prejudice, and that needs to be tackled, but it can't be tackled hiding. It has to be tackled out in the open.
Wow. So that was one of our contributions from Alice this afternoon. And Alice brought up some really interesting information. I think when we talk about education, it's two-factor. It's one, something which we do in schools. And two, it's something which we do in society as a whole. And part of the reason why trans people are erased from society in the past was because that education was told by news and was told by governments and institutions that wanted to see us sensationalized or erased. So first of all, I'm going to come to Ellen, and I'd just like to propose a couple of things to you. So if you had education when you were younger as a person, would you have been given the ability to, say, transition earlier? And what would that have meant to you? Not the facts that you would have needed to transition, but perhaps at least understand why you were feeling what you felt?
That's a difficult question, so thank you for that. When I was growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, there was, certainly in the Northeast, there was absolutely nothing. There was no information whatsoever. So I had no idea what was going on. I mean, some of my earliest memories when I was very little were dreaming, wishing that I would wake up as a girl the next day, and I had no idea that was what that meant. I think that if there had been some positive visibility outside of Carolyn Cossey being outed and Dick Emery doing his thing, then yeah, there's a very strong possibility that I would have realized the truth somewhat earlier than I did. The other thing is, back then, people, even if I had come out, then I would have been vilified and put into psychiatric care.
Yeah. And again, my point from earlier kind of comes back into it. In order for us to be visible and to be effective in that visibility, we need two things: safety and dignity. But back then, and still now to some degree, and that's because as a community, we've learned a lot. But what we did have for the general population, so say for the cisgender population, the non-trans people, we don't have the records of that. We don't have the we don't remember what there's nothing out there to prove that we existed in the 70s, to prove that we existed in the 60s, and why we have this level of awareness and requirement for this awareness now in the modern era. So I think sometimes people really struggle when they come across the word trans awareness. They struggle with that word because they don't understand why we need it. And that's because of the systemic erasure. So what is trans awareness for you?
Trans awareness for me, it's just about people not even necessarily sort of being supportive, just knowing the right things to say and not being scared of our existence. That we have that just it's about an acceptance of our existence and the fact that we aren't scary monsters, which is what a lot of the media seems to show us as.
Okay, that's brilliant. And I'm going to come across to Liam. So Liam, you are phenomenal. You really are, because the one thing I like about doing the job that I do is I get to see people throughout a long period of time, and I get to see people really truly get who they are. And when that penny drops and when that reality hits, they just become this all phenomenal being, which you are one of those people. So one thing that I have for you is, where did you get your trans awareness from? So you're obviously a slightly younger generation than myself, but you got your information from vastly different areas of as such. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think, as Ellen was saying, there wasn't enough awareness within schools and things like that. A lot of it hasn't changed in that you're not presented with awareness within schools from schools. The awareness that I got in school was from my friends, from just Google. It wasn't anything that was presented to me in a way that was like educational. It was often quite biased information. So, for example, from the media about how negative trans people were, and it wasn't anything that was sort of put there in an educational format, as in like trans people exist and things like that. The awareness I got wasn't enough, but I would say the support that I did get from friends and family outweighed that. But the awareness did come in later on in my school life. When I did come out at school, it would have been helpful a lot then, because people didn't understand, and sometimes it was often said to me like this was the first trans person that had counted, and this was the first thing they'd heard of it.
Yeah, I mean that's important, because again, in that small environment, you were the trailblazer. You were the person that may have been the visible trans person for somebody else. And that makes a big difference, because it may not be people within that class. It may be somebody at home. It may be somebody on a wider spectrum. But we all have a small amount of being trailblazers within us, where we set these, you're a phenomenal person. You're in this environment which nobody knows anything about trans people, and you become the educator. So it then turns on you. So where you didn't get that information, you've perhaps found a lot of that source of information online, on resources that local community groups may have given to you, friendships within the community. But then you become that educator when you come into it. So I guess my question that I have for you is, what solutions are there, do you think, we could put into schools or learning environments to help make that awareness slightly better for the trans person that's actually going through this process? The burden shouldn't really be just on you.
I mean, as you said, it does often fall on one person to be that education, which is quite difficult, especially considering the amount of variety and diversity within trans communities. So, for example, I was quite open about my experiences, and I had to explain sort of what trans meant, but it was to me, not the entire trans community. So, for example, I couldn't talk on behalf of trans women, I couldn't talk on behalf of other transgender people. So the awareness does need to come from trans people, and a variety of them. So we need non-binary representation, we need trans women, we need trans men, and we need the education to come from people who have those lived experiences.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I guess the same question to Steph. Now, Steph, the thing that I know about you is you're also an educator. And I guess when it comes to that, what do you think may work in an education environment to help aid trans people? Because what I see a lot of onus on that trans person to do the educating, and a lot of resistance from the general population to accept that we need that awareness. So is there anything to your knowledge that may work better? And what experiences have you had, I guess, in education environments in the past of being trans?
Wow. Okay, so a little step back, I think, to when I presented as Stephanie at work, and I didn't look as I do now. It was I didn't do things by half. But I didn't feel strong enough to speak to hundreds of students, my own learners, my own learner groups, for example. So a couple of colleagues that I've worked with for some years, I've worked at the college now for 20 years, they were kind enough to come in and say, right, this is Steph, you've known her as whatever, she's transgender, and one little group of they just happen to be health and social care students, predominantly girls, and the question was, right, if you've got any questions, just ask Steph, and if she can't answer it, come and speak to me. Have you got any questions? No hands went up. Okay, you can go. It was the end of the lesson, and they all trailed out, and then 6 of them walked back in and said, what is transgender? What is it? And I went, okay, we've got some proper learning to do. And I didn't want it and still don't seek this, but I sometimes feel as if I'm A, the only transgender person who works for the college, B, I've suddenly become an expert on all things trans, which I'm certainly not, and C, an educator, which I am, but this is quite a specialist niche thing to teach people, and it has to be done right. If you don't hook them, and by them I mean the young students, and I work with people who are 17 to 21, 22, sometimes a little older if they've got certain needs. But we didn't have anything really. We have a tutorial system that was failing in some respects, and it was paid lip service. So clearly the young people didn't understand it, and we and me had to make strides to rectify that. And so in the last 5-6 years, we've instigated lots of good quality training, and good in my opinion, and certainly awareness, so that young people who come, I'm using my hands over here, young people who come into the college can express themselves in a place where they feel safe to do so, and that's critical. They've come through school and they're still hiding. They know who they are and what they are, but they still hide. And then they come into further education, and all of a sudden, these new freedoms exist. And they sort of go, oh, wow, I can be me. I can wear a skirt. I can wear a dress. I can wear trousers. I can do what I like. Can I be called Fred or Janet or whatever? And it's like, yes, you can. And we will make sure that your lecturers respect your pronouns, respect your name, and you can change that with or without your parents' knowledge. And we've made tremendous strides, but we've still got a long way to go.
That's really good to hear that. I am, you know, that hand on my heart. You are a trailblazer, and what you've done is you've set a pattern, because it's not just what you do there, it's the mold of that people take away to their families and their education facilities and such. So, you know, that is phenomenal, and thank you for your visibility on that, Steph. You are truly a trailblazer.
It was difficult not to be visible. To be fair, there wasn't a place to hide, but I had some and have tremendous support from my colleagues who had my back. Any sports students were particularly nasty very early on, but the sports lecturers bounced them verbally, not physically, but they were told there what they should and shouldn't be doing and what they shouldn't be saying, and I felt safe because of that, which was really good, empowering.
That's where it comes again. See, we, you know, I in every single one of these categories, I always comes back to that safety and dignity. And I know I've said it like 200 times already, but for me, safety and dignity is the pillars. It's what we ask for. So when in any environment that a trans person exists, we have to look for those and strive for those two things. And if one of them is not met, it's not right, and that person's either not safe or not being treated with the dignity that they deserve.
The other thing that the college has done, besides policies and procedures for staff, I being one, I still don't believe I'm the only trans person in the village, but they're really making great strides with their policies. But the students are looked after too. We've changed the enrollment forms so you can self-identify, male, female, non-binary, whatever expression. You can change your name on the system. We can't do everything legally, but we at least acknowledge the young people that we work with and say, right, well, we will respect those words and those phrases.
That's amazing.
The last thing we've done, well, it's not the last thing, but we've got a very well supported student LGBT plus group who've sort of taken over a little bit in this last year. And that's the largest in Sunderland for young people. Now, there are other groups that I'm aware of, but this is the only one of this size. And that my employer now has outlets from Hartlepool to Berwick in the Scottish borders. And we've just taken over Northumberland, Kirkley Hall campus as well. So there's lots of students and lots of LGBT plus. And whilst my own mental illness meant I took a bit of a back step this last year, they are quite a powerful force, and they've got a direct voice now on the Equality and Diversity Committee. So they have a member on that committee now, which is good.
You see, that's what happens when trans people get to tell their truths and own their visibility. We create something in that space. We create it so that other people then feel more included. So maybe you were the egg that needed to crack, and then wonderful things happened after that point.
I was a very big egg.
Well, yes, but
it took a long time to hatch. The incubation was a long time, but eventually, as a little chick, it's been a journey. But yeah, I can't fault my employer, really. It's good.
Good stuff. I'm going to come round to Alice. So we started with Alice, and now we're going to kind of finish this question with Alice. So I just wanted to thank you for your contribution to our showcase, really. That was heartfelt, and you had examples in there of both coming out to, your hiking community that you have on YouTube, and also your own journey with visibility, which you've also marched in many parades and done many things. So I guess, can you put into words what that trans awareness means to you?
Oh, put me on the spot there. Yeah, I was absolutely terrified. I was so ashamed of myself and so embarrassed. And the way I was raised up, I was raised in a fairly right-wing conservative household. My parents still struggle with it. And when Ellen was talking before, she was saying about being put in a psychiatric hospital. My parents, when they found out I was trans, the first thing they went to was the psychiatric ward of the hospital. So that was like, yeah, great. I'm glad I didn't come out when I was a child. But it's, yeah, I mean, I ended up giving myself a good telling off. I was going to be, and I was meeting some wonderful people who were really helping me a lot and helping me overcome that fear and that embarrassment I had. And I was scared of being seen with these wonderful people who were helping me. And I was initially I was embarrassed about being trans, but then I became embarrassed about being ashamed to be seen with some wonderful people. And I gave myself a real good telling off for it. And I vowed that I was going to be as visible as I possibly could because of that. And I made sure that I walked across Newcastle with people from B, and I made sure that I was standing side by side with them at every step of the way. And I made sure I went to Pride, and after the first Pride, I was hiding. The second Pride, the third Pride, the fourth Pride, I made sure that I was shouting as loud as everybody else. And when I came out to the world in June 2020, and I started a full-time job in November 2020, and I had nothing, no clothes or anything. And I ended up having to take a loan out for £1,000 just to buy clothes and makeup and stuff just to go to work because I didn't have anything. And I made sure I was visible from the start. My mask was in trans pride colours. My lanyard was trans pride colours. I didn't hide one bit that I was trans to my workplace.
And your story will be up on the B page on Wednesday as well, as part of our sort of trans visibility series. and I would like to kind of point out there that, you know, one of the points that you've made is that your visibility became your power. And you took that with you, because in that there's strength. So when people see who you are inside, it gives you the strength and the ability to just be more, and to also spread the word as well. You spend your time teaching others, but whether that be online or within our groups, and certainly the people that email in looking for support, you spend a lot of time with them to help them. And that's an amazing thing to see. You use your visibility to help other people on their journey, and that's fantastic. So I guess, you know, from the whole community, we say thank you for that. And no, you know, your visibility when somebody is bold is and can be as bold, because not everybody can.
No, they can't. I mean, I lived in fear all my life, and I swore that I wasn't going to live in fear anymore. One of the first things I did when I started work, I think within this, I did my training November, December, and we started going live January. And the end of January, beginning of February, I wrote a piece on how to deal with transgender claimants in the civil service. Just initially for my group, but then got shared in the North Yorkshire area. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of like the problems that we face, and some of the problems we have are quite unique, but people just don't realize, and they don't realize that like 1 in 3 employers will not employ somebody who's trans, and stuff like that. It's like ticking the boxes on an application form is such a big deal, such a hardship for trans people who are in the closet. And we have to make people aware that this is a case, like you can't expect people to fill in government forms which are gendered, and they struggle with it. It's a trigger for their gender dysphoria, having to tick boxes which don't match their identity, and just having to raise that awareness for people.
Yeah, thank you for that as well. I'm going to stay with Alice when I move on to the next section, but actually we're going to bring everybody back now, because the third topic that we're talking about is something which is actually, it's really important to me personally. So I am somebody who enjoys history. I like it. I like looking at it. I like admiring it. I'm not an intelligent person, but I like to understand people's pasts. And what I find within the trans community is that trans history is erased. And what it was replaced with is replaced with poor media representation. Everywhere I looked, it was replaced with that. So I'm just going to roll a little clip, if we have that, of what I'm talking about, because I think that will help us sort of visualize what we truly can create when we are a community where our history isn't erased. So let's roll it. What does Trans Day of Visibility mean to me? Well, for me, it's not about a celebration. It's not about remembrance. It's not about people coming together. For me, it's representation. It's seeing yourself as part of a larger community, and it's allowing other people who perhaps aren't even out yet to see themselves in you by being visible. One of the best examples of trans visibility is the Museum of Transology, a collection that was built by E.J. Scott as a form of curatorial direct action designed to halt the erasure of transestry. From the author, the Museum of Transology is the UK's most significant collection of objects representing trans, non-binary and intersex people's lives. Never again will historians be able to say that you can't call trans people trans in the past. Never again will trans, non-binary and intersex people be hard to find in history. And never again will the records of our lives be written by the media that spectacularize us, the legal systems that criminalize, and the psychiatrists who pathologize us. Well, so that was a short clip from the video that I put up earlier. And, I'm a particular fan of the Museum of Transology, as you know, I visited it. And, the biggest shame, though, is it's down in Brighton and I live in the northeast of England. So it isn't actually as accessible as I'd like it to be. But a lot of us have had at times the media ask us for our stories. And one thing that I like to do is tell stories as enthusiastic, but also as authentic as they can be. What media outlets tend to do that aren't controlled by trans people is they tell those stories in the cis gaze lens, which can sometimes be the fact that they want the before and after pictures. They want the things that we aren't as comfortable with parting. And in fact, we had this with a reporter very recently that moved on because we weren't allowed to tell our own story the way that we want to tell it. So I'm going to bring this up to the panel. Does anybody have any sort of experience as to, times that the media has caused you to feel less involved in society, where you felt almost made to be that person which they're trying to erase, and even now, even in our most current society, people are trying to erase us, and I find that horrific. So let me go to, has anybody got any sort of experiences they'd like to share?
That's a difficult one again.
It
You're
is a
asking
very
the
difficult
hard
one.
questions tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for me personally, no, I haven't had anything which is sort of directly targeted towards me. But again, it's just as you're saying, there's so much which is from the cis gaze. Even things which are allegedly sort of pro-trans are difficult to are they're really they don't center us. I'm thinking of things like the BBC sitcom Boy Meets Girl and Transparent, both of which were written by cis people. And while Boy Meets Girl may have had a trans woman as sort of one of the two main characters, the writer himself said that when he was doing his research, or inverted commas, and when he came up with the story, he didn't actually talk to any trans people whatsoever, and it just that infuriated me. It's just it's appalling.
Yeah, and that's the experience which I've seen. Just erase history. Now, the Museum of Transology, they're doing something about that. They're putting the collection. They're still collecting, but they're putting a lot of their items that we have that we've been erased with in one place, so we can prove it. So, that's a simplification of what it is. Obviously, you heard the full explanation earlier. But I guess for non-binary people, are we even off the starting blocks there? I mean, I see that the museum has collated some stuff around that, but, at least for trans people, we have poor representation. I think what's missing for non-binary people is any representation. And so the erasure it's something really hard to come back from. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share on that?
Yeah, so I think when you look at kind of relatively recent history, it's hard to find non-binary people. We are there, we've always been there, but the term non-binary is relatively new. That doesn't mean that we weren't around before it. We were just maybe called something else. But I think one of the things that can be really helpful for non-binary people to start becoming aware of is how much non-binary people and kind of gender non-conformity in general has been respected more through different cultures, through different time periods. I'm really into ancient Mesopotamian history, and there's writings from 5,000 years ago that talk about people who are not male and are not female, and talks about us as being sacred and having special abilities, which I think is brilliant. And there's been loads and loads since then. It's only as you get into kind of more modern history that the erasure really started to crack down on us and try to stamp us out of existence. And you can trace that back to how that happened when sort of colonialism was going on, and Christian missionaries were going out to these cultures that did recognize more than two genders and were basically telling them, you're not allowed to do that. That's not what we do, and did their absolute best to erase it by force. And that's had a horrific impact on many, many cultures around the world, but has also had an impact on people within Western European culture, because we've also lost track of our own ability to explore outside the gender binary process.
That's a really good insight. Thank you for that. And I know you've obviously, you're well versed in that. I would say let's think about the more modern era. I'm thinking maybe Dylan, do you have any sort of insight into? Do you feel represented in the media today?
That's a. You really like to ask difficult questions, don't you?
I do. I ask all the hard hitters.
So yes and no. In terms of, like, for instance, like cinematic media and things like that, we're just not present. And when we are present, it's, we've got people like Benedict Cumberbatch's kind of sort of portrayal of a non-binary person in Zoolander 2, which was, from what I could see, was terrible. Really, really offensive, and just, yeah. But in terms of the media, I would say, like, you have increasing sort of appearances of, like, for instance, like Fox and Owl, who will go on This Morning and sort of do interviews and things like that. But I'm not entirely sure that with facing up to people like Piers Morgan and that sort of thing, that we're being given the best kind of chance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just my thoughts on the matter.
So, is there anybody that has had positive media experiences? I guess that's the next thing. Is anybody recently thought, well, that does represent me in the media, or is it just that the only way forward is we have to create our own media? Is that how we challenge this erasure, this problem that we have or have had for many years? So Steph, you've got your hand there. What can how can you see a way forward there?
God, you and your questions. And why did I wave my hand? I'm going to take this back a little bit and then try and answer your question in a roundabout way. You were in a conversation with Liam earlier saying you're a different generation to him. Well, I'm a different generation to pretty much everybody else on this panel. And there was no visible or accessible form of media research or anything for me as a child growing up in the early 60s and late 60s. It wasn't until the early 70s or mid 70s when I started to see negative portrayals of trans women in particular. And Ellen mentioned Carolyn Cossey earlier. And everybody since appears to have this negative, man turns into woman, woman turns into man becomes pregnant, negativity surrounding it. And where we go from, I don't know. We touched briefly on education earlier. That for me has to be the key. My daughter is 21 and she is totally intolerant of anybody that's not tolerant, if that makes any sense, and very accepting, very open, very honest to have discussions with her peer group. So anybody in their early 20s sees a very different world, I hope, to the one that I saw growing up. There was nothing positive, nothing that I could see. And so when everything's negative, you don't come out, you don't face the world, you don't say, this is me. The few pioneers that did that, people say to me, oh, you're brave, and said to Ellen, oh, you're so brave. I'm not. They were brave. My God, they this was transitioning in the 40s, the 50s and 60s was horrendous, but they did it. So all I can say is do what we're doing now. Be seen. Hard as it is, this is the first time I've done a public forum that might be seen by other people outside a very select group. That's hard for me. But it's important that the message is out, that we are people, we are human beings. We're not sort of two-headed aliens or growing tentacles and weird shit. We're people. treat us with respect and dignity, and we'll give that back. But show us a bit of courtesy in the first place and put something positive in the press. I'll stop now, otherwise
I agree. I mean, I'm on your side, you know, and it is about positivity. I think I'm going to come to Jay next, because you see, Jay, you know, through your, I guess, generational experience there, Steph was talking about the fact of growing up in the sort of like 70s, but I mean, I guess you're, you know, considerably more sort of versed with what's there right now, and I guess you're still doing your sort of bit of growing up. I don't mean to make it an age thing, but what for you is good representation? What do we need to do to make the next generation of people that are going through what you're going through right now feel more comfortable and not be erased?
I think the generational thing definitely comes into play, especially with like trans role models as well. But I think in a younger generation, we are quite lucky to have access to a community. I luckily didn't struggle to be able to Google and find, like, I joined a youth group. I came out when I was quite young. I went to a youth group for trans kids, and then as I got older and got into community activism, I was able to help create those spaces for other people. But without those spaces in the first place, I wouldn't have done that. And I think that's one advantage that the younger trans community do have. But you obviously have the disadvantage of kind of social media as a whole. And we are very like media centric generation, but I know, like, with me and Liam being like a similar age, we've got a lot of the same like trans role models, and it all comes down to social media. It all comes down to people putting themselves out there online, which gave us the visibility to be able to look and say, like, yeah. And it was mostly YouTube it came from. But I think in the future, going forward, I think just more things like this, we just need to stay visible. And I think being a younger person, especially when I first came out, I never imagined myself growing old as a trans person. And I think a lot of young trans people say that, like, you don't see many older role models. You see role models about 25 to 30. Until recently, I could never imagine myself being an old man. Like, and since I've found visibility within myself and I've looked to the community to find that comfort and that visibility, I have found it. But without that, it was so hard to imagine myself as a trans person being old, because it wasn't something I thought about, something I knew happened, but not that I could see for myself. And I think that is a common theme within the community as well.
Yeah. But thank you for your input on that one. And yeah, I agree. I think that's especially when it comes to the social media being probably one of the biggest tools that we have now to communicate. And what a year to have it as well in the pandemic year. If we didn't have this method, think of how many people we would have missed, and not been able to help and not been able to support while we've been doing it. So I'm going to come up to Gemma, and I want to come to Gemma because I want to talk more about, you know, are there solutions to these problems other than, you know, we've talked about doing what we're doing now and more of it, having these hard-hitting conversations. And I know I keep throwing these hard questions at people, but I'm looking to know, you know, is there another way? Is there another media outlet that we can or a way that we can, you know, show our stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think to be honest, it's everywhere, isn't it? I mean, you know, you see the rise of social media, and that's been a huge part of getting our stories out there. In terms of traditional media, I think that's still really important. And what needs to happen in those sort of cases is that, you know, when you speak to a trans person, like, you need to either have someone who is relatively clued up, or you need to engage with an organization alongside the person that you want to speak to, because obviously what happens quite often is the media will take someone who is new to transition or is vulnerable, and they'll sort of coerce them into telling the story that they already wanted to tell. You know, the thing that you mentioned earlier on was involving me, where I was contacted to do a story for LGBT History Month, and we sort of came up with an idea, and it sounded like a good idea for a story. But you know, we get partway through it, and then it's like, and do you have any pictures? Do you have your before pictures? Do you have a picture as a child? Because our audience just won't understand it without that. And you just think, well, really? You know, trans issues have been in the media for long enough now that surely people get the very basics of, you know, I'm a trans woman. I used to present as male. There we go. Surely that's obvious. You don't need a photo to illustrate that. So I think, you know, it's about wherever you're going to share trans stories, it's about letting the trans voice through. One really good example of that, and this is a media that we haven't really touched on, and it's got a very checkered history, is games. And Katie, you know, we played a game together a while ago, which had a fantastic representation of a trans character. It had a trans guy, and it was only about half an hour in, a very story-driven thing, that you actually realised that this character was trans, but it wasn't like a gotcha reveal. If you knew what you were looking for, as you walk around like their apartment, you can see things. They've got a leaflet on their table, which is like an LGBT support group, and there was like I think a prescription for tester gel or something like that. So it was like all very background things, and it built up the character. The company that made that game had a trans consultant help them to make it. And there's the difference. It shone through. So I think, you know, there are so many different forms of media. There's music, there's games, there's film, whatever it is. You know, we can't make the noise just on our own. We can do events like this, and they're amazing, but we need those bigger platforms to kind of amplify us and lift our voices up without filtering them and then starting to tell the story in the way that they want to.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that's huge, isn't it? Especially in games. I mean, that's a form of media that I'd completely ignored, but equally important because it's that's something which is transgenerational. You know, that's something that everyone is involved with. You know, how we entertain ourselves, whether that be television, social media, games, and of course sport as well. You know, media even extends to that and how they represent our sporting heroes. So I'm gonna come down now to Alice, and I just want to talk, Alice, you know, shortly, just about what do you have any ideas of what media representation we can use? What tools are there that we have at our disposal that can make a difference for that next generation?
Okay, I think that the mainstream press is like just a no-go. I think now and again you get a good story in the Metro. Now and again you get a good story in the Independent, but that's it. Everything's back. Anyone who wants to try and get their voice heard in the mainstream press is just taken out of context, and trans people are now just wary of it, and they refuse to enter that debate, so to speak. It's not really a debate, is it? It's just like them busy having a go at us and using our own words against us. So I think that we have to create our own media. And as Gemma just touched on before, in my coming out video on YouTube, I made it, but it's just like a thing in the background, you know. My channel is about hiking, it's about local history. I go out, I go on a hike, I visit places of interest, I look on a map and oh, that looks interesting, let's go and have a look and see what's there. And we'll go there and there'll be some history, and I'll do some research on the history, and I'll say, all right, this is what happened at this place and this is what happened there. And that's what my channel's about. My channel's not about me being trans. I just happen to be trans, and I wanted to be visibly trans, but I don't want my channel suddenly to become all about trans issues, because that's not what my channel's about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I want like that to kind of come across, but like, yeah, be visible, but at the same time, like, just show that we're just like normal people. We have our own interests. It's not all about being trans all the time. There are other things happening. And I think that kind of comes across quite positively within, because like there's like Twitter is a strange thing. There's a lot of really nasty places in Twitter, a lot of dark side in Twitter, but there are actually some little pockets of light, and the hiking community is one of those pockets of light where politics is left at the door. Anything to do with like LGBT or any prejudice whatsoever is left at the door, and the conversations about hiking, the outdoors, and stuff like that. So being visible within that community is just being yourself. It's not like talking about it all the time. It's just like there in the background, and then now and again something will come up. I had one woman like contact me. I have 2 Twitter accounts. I have one which does all the trans stuff, and I've got one which does the hiking stuff. And they contacted me on the hiking channel, and what they said was quite innocent sort of thing. But when I went to like look at their channel, and it's like full of anti-trans stuff, and I was like, I don't want this person on my channel at all. So I just said, look, at my channel's about outdoor stuff. If you've got problems with trans people, take it elsewhere. And the entire community was behind me. Everyone was like, yeah. And then I posted a picture of me walking in Newcastle with a trans flag on the hiking channel, and I didn't lose a single subscriber. I actually gained a few from like LGBT hikers, and again, they're the same. You see, there's gays, there's lesbians, there's bi, there's everyone there, but it's like that's just like in the background, you know. It's not the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that social media lets you do that.
I think that's probably the key that we've been, really resonated with, is the fact that when we get to tell our own truths, our own stories, and we get to be in charge of that, it is not only fulfilling for that person, but it means it's more powerful for everybody else in the community. And it actually, that's when we start creating instead of being erased from things. So I'm going to come across to Liam dead quick, and then after that I'm going to circle round to Ellen, just to close. I just want to run this idea past you, Liam. In this modern world that we live in, a trans-led media outlet exists. And that trans-led media outlet is capable of putting out stories that are both positive and challenging. That to me is my best solution. That's where I see it moving to. Do you think that would be listened by the general population? Would that work, or is it an echo chamber? Is it something that will just really only exist within our own circles? I'm interested in that. What do you think? Is that something which could work? Would it work for you? And do you see it being something that could be, acknowledged wider by society?
I think it could be a good thing, yeah, especially the big one being trans-led. For me, I think the media that I do tend to listen to more and is more important to me when talking about trans things is that it's trans-led. I would rather sort of listen to someone's personal experiences with trans rather than someone talking about the community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think, and what about the wider impacts? Do you think we can reach society in that? I think that's my worry. Will it only exist for trans people, or could you see it working as an effective education tool as well?
I think it could be primarily good for education, especially for those trans people who are wanting something to be able to look to, but also for the general public, in that there's not much sort of media that has gone out there from trans people. There are a few positive ones. For example, like I had some media out there about my top surgery fundraising, which was a positive experience. It was like well done by the person who did report it, but there's not much in terms of trans-led media, which I think is the problem.
and when we tell our own stories, I think it becomes more inclusive as well. So we have a lot of disabled and neurodiverse people within our community that, they get erased even more. And then we talk about people of color. People of color aren't even present on this board tonight. But we exist to open those doors. Our voice should, recognizing that, open up the ability for these people to share their stories and their media. But right now, it doesn't exist. It's not available to them. And that's my biggest takeaway is because they haven't been given the voice, especially people of color in the Northeast. We don't hear much from them, and that concerns me. I think if we truly want to take it to the next level, and we truly want to make sure that we're not just this white able-bodied, I'm not saying everyone here is able-bodied, but certainly the wider population is, there are, in my opinion, complete erasure of non-binary people too. So I'm going to come back to Ellen, like I said, and I Ellen, I would like to talk a little bit about that, because I think if we can open up our media outlet with the visibility that we have, we can make sure that people's stories that aren't getting heard right now, like the people of color in our community, we can make sure that that's going to work. You're on mute, by the way, as well.
Of course I am, because it wouldn't be a streaming session without it. People of color, trans and queer people of color are very much, as you say, I mean, they're non-existent on this discussion. And I don't particularly feel qualified to talk about them, because I'm obviously not a person of color. But we need to try and be as inclusive as possible. I think it's quite a good thing that two of the sort of the biggest trans personalities are people of color. That's Janet Mock and Laverne Cox. And what you were saying earlier on about whether or not the cis community would be open to trans-led media, I think that the documentary Disclosure is a brilliant example of that, and shows that for decent trans-led media, there is going to be an audience. I believe Disclosure is up for an Oscar this year. I think that the biggest sort of source of media for trans people at the moment is through things like podcasts, which we haven't mentioned at all. But there's some brilliant trans-led podcasts out there, and just general queer podcasts, which are very, very trans inclusive. And that, I think, is very much where the minority media outlets are they're blossoming.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, when it comes to the way that we expand this, I think that's where we've got to look. We've got to look to the people that are succeeding. And, if we don't, what resources do they need? How can we help them? How can we aid these become more and better? That's on us. The people that do have this voice, is to make sure that we find them and not, because otherwise where do you end up in erasure again? And we end up in that same situation where we were. It's self-fulfilling. Unless the whole community can be moved along together, we will always be suppressed by the poor media representation that lives within all of us through society.
Yeah, I think actually one of the biggest erasures of trans history that have, in recent times, that has not been mentioned this evening, is the Institute of Sexuality in Berlin, run by Magnus Hirschfeld. He was a sexologist in the 1920s and 1930s, and if you've ever seen the pictures of the Nazi book burnings, they are the works of the sort of, many of the pictures are the works of Hirschfeld and the Institute being burnt. And the reason they're being burned is because there was a vast amount of research into transgender identity. It wasn't called transgender at the time, obviously, but into trans identities. And if that had not happened, we wouldn't be having this discussion today, because that set us back decades in visibility, in understanding, and it has messed with the trans community for literally the last 100 years. And I think it's important to remember that, especially with the political situation in the world at the moment, where extreme right-wing voices are getting much louder, and we have to remember this is where it goes to. In a way, I'm slightly worried about the Museum of Transology, because it is, again, it's all of this information in one, easily destroyable place.
Yeah. I mean, they've got a bit of a fight on their hands with me in the way, if that ever came to it. So
me too.
Yeah. But no, I take your point on that one, and it's a good point to end on, actually, because we have these things in our history that we do know that happened, and we know at the points where we were erased. So for me, I think moving forward, we have to do as much positive media as we can, and we have to showcase as much visibility as we can through not just our community, but wider, whether that be education, whether that be sport, whether that be our own inclusion in panels and such as well. So before we go tonight, firstly, I would like to thank not only all of our contributors from earlier, which were all fantastic. And like I say, you are all phenomenal people. Also, all of the panelists that joined us here tonight. It has been a horrendous year. It really has, for all of us. And yet we have managed to be visible and remember what that visibility means. So I would like to bring everybody in as we have, and especially like to thank Gemma, who's been our tech expert tonight, and making sure that everything has gone smooth. And obviously the full team who are here. And thank you for sharing your truths and your identity. It's not always easy, but when we do it, it's powerful, and it makes a difference to those who are watching. Earlier in the first live stream, we talked. I mentioned right at the beginning that this is the first of something. I believe, and I want this to be part of a bigger project called the Trans Visibility Project, and something which is not owned by a single person or organization, but we can operate all year round. This time next year, I want to do a show reel that has such a wide diversity in it. Every story that we have, whether it's Trans Pride, which started in Brighton, that started as a picnic in a park. And now look at it. It is a phenomenal experience to be involved with, empowering. So this is our picnic. For everybody that's listening and watching, and for all of us panelists that are involved, this is the onus is on us now. What can we do with the Trans Visibility Project for the Northeast, and can we capture as much as we can, and make a difference? That's what it's about. It's about making that difference. When we come together and trans people are allowed to tell their own stories, that's powerful. That really is powerful. So I'm going to let everyone sort of wave goodbye, and then we're going to roll out, hopefully with a video, if as long as it's queued up. I don't want to drop this on anyone, but I want on a script to dance and sing us out with the help of Mandy Lee. Check her out on YouTube. Not a trans entry, but she is a wonderful person and some great music. So thank you to Felix or On a Script and everybody else that's on tonight's panel. Thank you for watching, and we will be back soon with some more visibility. So from me and the gang, goodbye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
The video won't load. I do apologise.
Well, while the video's loading, we'll talk amongst ourselves.
The video won't.
It was all going so well.
Up until the final hurdle. What did I say about the technical team?
Okay.
Gemma, you're fired.
Yes, and rightly so. Guys, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I can get this on in time.
That's fine. We don't have to. If you want to watch it, it is in the earlier live stream, and we will be showcasing it on the 31st as well. And that is the piece by On a Script, and it's not just interpretive. It is you would call it drag, you would call it performative. It is a wonderful experience. It's something for everybody to enjoy. We should celebrate art when we find it. So thank you, and good night from us.
Good night.
Bye everybody.
Bye.